You're listening to the Live Free podcast. I'm your host, Christine, certified life coach, pain to power mentor, and creator of Embody You Mindset Mastery School. I'm here today to discuss living life after disease, disaster, or adversity, to discuss living life fully once again. A life of hope, peace, and resiliency. A life fully embodied. I utilize the lessons that I learned going through not one, but two primary cancers. I'm here today to guide you to the life of your dreams, turn your pain into power, and lead you back to yourself. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Live Free podcast. Today I have the pleasure of bringing Laura Lawrence to you. Laura is a public speaker, a multiple-time author, and educator who is passionate about supporting conversations around mental wellness for women, mothers, and youth after experiencing her own challenges. She calls these challenges a frying pan moment, and I'm looking so forward to breaking that down for you. She chased after some big dreams and left some pretty comfortable spots to chase those dreams, and she inspires women everywhere after making those big strides in life. I'm looking so forward to going through this episode with you. Thank you, Laura, for being part of the podcast. And let's get started. Okay, so thank you, Laura, so much for being here. I'm so looking forward to having this chat and hearing a little bit about your story.
I am so honored that you invited me to be here with you today and share this with your community. So excited to chat.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, let's start a little bit about your background. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm a small town Saskatchewan girl. Grew up in a little town called Cudworth, Saskatchewan. I have a sister, a younger sister, and I grew up the oldest grandchild on both sides of the family. And so I was always, I was always the oldest, and with the oldest comes certain responsibilities, and I played a lot of sports. I ended up going to university and studied to become a teacher. I was a high school science teacher for over 15 years. Just loved that role as an educator. Ended up spending a lot of time with kids outside of the classroom. Extracurricularly, I was a volleyball coach for over a decade. I spent a lot of time in the arts with kids. I was a musical director. So I was always really involved as a youth in my community, very involved in extracurricular, and then also as a teacher. And so, yeah, small town girl at heart, for sure.
Absolutely. And education is in your veins, it sounds like. And I know that that's so much of what you do now.
Yeah, you know what? I think that just we're all born with these divine given skills and personality traits where we then attract a certain career path, certain people, certain relationships. And I was born into a family with very strong women, very driven women, very community minded, the helpers, the healers. And so yeah, that gift was passed down to me by my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother. So I come from a long line of very resilient women. So my grandmother came over after World War II. She left her whole family there, her mother and her sister, just to restart. And she met my grandfather before they both came over here. And yeah, she's just been a pillar to our family. And I know probably a lot of women listening have that relationship with, a mother, a grandmother, an aunt. And it's that really strong yin energy, that root that I think keeps us, connected to our communities and just doing the work that helps and heals others, for sure.
Certainly. Well, and that's so much of what you do. let's talk a little bit about your turning point. So you're educating, you're being a teacher, you're doing your thing, and you've taken a left turn. So I'm curious, what brought you to that?
Yeah, I love that left turn. It was more like it was more like, yeah, like a frying pan moment where I mean, and everybody listening has one of those. And if they don't, it's coming. Where life takes a completely different path, trajectory, whether it be a diagnosis, like you know that, whether it be a change in career, whether it be the loss of a loved one, a relationship that ends. And for me, it was a relationship that came to an end. So I had married my high school sweetheart, typical small town, small town girls. And we'd been together for just over 17 years. And then the frying pan moment hit. And so, long story short, that really ended up in a pretty public, display. When you're from a small town and you're teaching in a small town, you're involved in the community. A lot of people got a front row seat at kind of the pain that endured through that separation and divorce. I kind of say it was like their view from the cheap seats of what was kind of happening. But behind closed doors, we all have stories. We all have these pivotal moments where what was working is no longer working. And so my kids were 2 and 6 at the time. I was 33 years old, and it was heartbreaking. It brought me to my knees for sure. It was something that I can say now, hindsight. I mean, I think all of us who've been in relationships or in scenarios where it just didn't feel like it was aligning, but we still loved the people dearly. We still loved what we did dearly. But there's just that knowing. So that happened just over 10 years ago. And yeah, like I said, it brought me to my knees, like most frying pan moments do in our lives, because the fear and uncertainty of not knowing what lies ahead when you've had a pretty predictable, pretty comfortable, even if it's not entirely happy life, we most often crave the comfort of knowing than not knowing, and so that was really difficult. Spiraled me into a pretty deep depression, changed who I was. I mean, for anybody listening again, and you can relate to this, Christine, there's always going to be life before and life after that frying pan moment, that pivotal change. And so it took me completely out of my teaching career. I ended up leaving my teaching career, starting a completely different path. I studied as an alternative wellness practitioner. I studied body talk. I studied aromatherapy, became certified in both of those modalities, and then started my own wellness business because I knew that both of those modalities had really helped me through that dark time and got me back onto my feet, along with a pretty supportive circle of people who loved me dearly. And then that was now I'm on a new path.
Wow. That is amazing. So you found something that helped you during this dark night of the soul, and I agree. I love frying pan moment. Well, I'll certainly be mentioning that in the future. Be like, Laura Lawrence talks about this frying pan moment. But that's truly what it is. And so you found something that gave you this feeling of home, safety, and then you turned that around and said, "Hey, I want to help other people feel this too, and understand this too." How did you come across Body Talk?
Yeah, I love that question because listen, this is what I say: the things that are meant for us find us. And Body Talk is one of those modalities. Not a lot of people know about it yet. It's an incredibly powerful modality to help support taking the body out of stress mode and really getting back to that innate healing program that the body does so beautifully for us. So it found me. What actually happened, and I write about it in my book, Behind Closed Doors, where I share snippets of my story, is that I was in a really dark place. It was about 3 months into the separation, and I had 2 friends who knew that I was struggling, and they reached out to my parents, and they said, like, "We are really concerned about Laura, really concerned," and rightly so. I was one of those, proud, I'll take it on the shoulder. I'll do what I can. But people can see when you're in pain. And so they reached out. They had got together an intervention weekend for me where they had scheduled me a body talk and therapy appointment with the psychologist whom I still see today, 12 years later. And they also scheduled me a Reiki appointment. And it was a whole weekend of just like, let's get into this, Laura. Let's start you on the healing journey. And to be honest, that first body talk session, and I always share this with my clients, I was not impressed. I'm very left brained. I'm a science teacher. I was like, don't even know what that was. Didn't work. Thanks, but no thanks. Got to lay on a table, have an hour break. But it kept coming back into my life. It was like this little tap on the shoulder, And so then I was introduced to it again and I tried it again. And then finally I found a practitioner who really resonated with me. And I had a couple sessions that were life changing. And then I just knew, when you have that gut feeling that there's something that's calling you, and that's your path of true integrity, and that's the path you need to go down. So, and that's how many of my clients were brought into Body Talk as well. Somebody told them about it. They saw a brochure, they saw something, in social media, I'd never heard about it. So that's how I got there.
Wow. I'm curious, this practitioner, would you say that this practitioner that you found was science-minded as well? Like, did you align? Okay.
Yeah. And, and then as I continued to study Body Talk, I learned that it's all science, it's all the mind-body connection and quantum physics and consciousness. And I can tell you, Christine, like getting myself involved in that world and learning that our pain lies in our subconscious programming. It lies in that invisible backpack that we carry with us, that many of us don't even know that there are stories in there that we have yet to unpack. And those stories and that pain and that emotion, it drives our physical bus. Before we hopped on here, I was scrolling and I came across this post on social media that said, whatever emotions we aren't recognizing show up as symptoms, physical symptoms. And so Body Talk gave me this incredible lens at looking deeper to where my physical pain started, where my dis-ease started. And so it has for many of my clients. And so I built quite a thriving practice in a community where nobody knew what Body Talk was. There was not a Body Talk practitioner. And before I knew it, I was working 4 days a week, seeing 5 to 6 clients a day. And was an incredible journey. Yeah.
And adding in aromatherapy, which is another very science-based.
Very science-based. Yeah.
Modality.
And you know what? I'd always been interested in essential oils as someone who loves chemistry. When I started to study that as well, I recognized, how knowledgeable these practitioners have to be about left brain things like science. And I think that there's maybe a little bit of a stigma or misunderstanding out there that some of these alternative modalities are just, fluffy and woo, and there's not a lot of substance there. But anybody who's tried it, who's trained in it, who knows, incredibly powerful to help, facilitate in a healing journey, both physical, mental, emotional, spiritual.
Beautiful. Amazing. Okay, so you're trucking along. You've got your 4-day a week job. You are loving what you're doing, but I know that since then you've had even more pivots. So I'm super curious. What were your turning points there? What happened there?
Yeah, I missed the kids. I missed the energy of the classroom. I missed working with that vital energy of youth. I had been working with them ever since I was like 15. And so I sat one day because I always have a vision of creating. My mind is really programmed that way. I'm always thinking about the next creative thing. And so I thought, how can I take what I know and I've learned from Body Talk, this mind-body connection awareness, and really sinking in and being aware of how our emotions show up in our body. This is powerful. I want to teach kids this. As an educator and a parent, I know that our kids carry a lot more on their shoulders and backs than they'll let us know. We always say kids kids are resilient, but you know what? I don't like using that word because I think they perceive to be resilient. You know, they're really good at masking things. So then I started to create some programs, some educational programs where I could go into schools. Schools would hire me and I would go in and do mindfulness workshops with kids, teaching them different self-regulation strategies, building emotional resilience. Yeah, how to recognize where your emotion is showing up in your body and where it's being stored, and then what can we do with that using breath work, using guided visual imagery. And I'm telling you, Christine, like when you sit in front of a classroom or a school of 100 kids and you walk them through a breathwork activity or a guided visual imagery activity, you can just feel the collective energy of the room just like calm. And I have teachers go like, oh my gosh, that's magic. Like, how did you do that? So that's what I did. And then I started having, colleges reach out to me and other professional organizations that had heard about me and said, can you do this for us, for adults, for our staff? And that's how it snowballed. And I've really been kind of public speaking my whole life as an educator. And so then I took that to more of a speaking platform. Then the pandemic hit. That was a pivot.
Yes. Yep. Certainly. Collective pivot.
That was a collective pivot, which I'm sure each and every one of us could write our own book about how that went for us.
Yeah.
But what I ended up doing during the pandemic is because I couldn't go out and speak in schools anymore, and I had this like burning creativeness still building. I'm like, what am I going to do with this? And I said to my husband one day, like, I feel like I have a story inside of me. I want to write a book. But I wasn't ready to share my own personal story yet. And then one day, and anybody who's a creative, I mean, everybody's creative, but anybody who has created a masterpiece, an artwork or music or writing, know that you have this, what I call a divine draw. So one morning I was up, it was actually right after the George Floyd murder, shortly after that. You remember it was the pandemic and that was happening down in the States, and collectively we could all feel the world's pain.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't, as an empath, sometimes that feels very uncomfortable for me. I have to do something with those feelings. And so one morning at 4 a.m, I couldn't sleep. I got up, went down into my living room, took my laptop, and I wrote my first manuscript for my children's book, Elliot's Rainbow Roller Coaster. And it just dropped, the entire manuscript, all 800 words, in a half an hour. And I couldn't even recreate that today if you asked me to. And so that was my journey, into becoming it. It was a divine download. And so since then, I've written 5 children's books. 3 of them have been published. 2 are coming out in the next year or 2. And then I wrote a nonfiction book for women, men too, but called Behind Closed Doors: Memoirs of Motherhood, Marriage, and Mental Health. And so, so now I can say I'm an author.
No kidding. A few times. Yes.
A few times.
I've seen your book. I haven't read it yet, but I've definitely like flipped through the pages and looked at it, and it's so beautifully done. I love all of the comments on the front from some notable authors. And it looks beautiful, and I'm looking forward to reading it. It's on my list. And that's not an easy feat to write as many children's books as you have, to write a very, very well cited book. I can see from the back of your book, there's a lot of information in there. It's very thick, so I feel like it's very long. That is a huge amount of effort and time that has been put into that since 2020. Wow.
Yeah. I said to my husband this morning, I just worked a market this past weekend in Saskatoon, and anytime I work a market, I don't do it very often, but it's so heart and soul charging. I meet the most incredibly beautiful families and individuals. We have conversations about grief and losing loved ones. And because one of my kids' books is on death and grief and loss. And I get to hear stories of little people who are going through hard things, but that this book might bring them some hope. And, I met a woman this weekend who is in active cancer treatment, and I gifted her my book, Behind Closed Doors, and one of my Heart Talk necklaces. I said, listen, you got warrior energy. I can feel it. Like, let's go. Let's do this. And here, it gives me goosebumps talking about it. But I think most of us, don't give ourselves enough credit for how far we've come. And every single
Mm.
person listening to this podcast, and you too, I mean, we've all turned pain into purpose somehow. And the person who I think doesn't recognize that the most is ourselves. But this weekend, after this weekend, I said to my husband, I'm proud of what I did because of what I
Oh,
see, the
yeah.
like the heart ripple effect. Books bring people together. They heal hearts. They give hope. They let us escape a little bit. They let us see versions of ourselves. And I had a gal stop by this weekend. She'd bought the adult book, nonfiction book, back in the fall, and she was pregnant at that time. And she stopped by again. She said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "I sure do." And then she showed me her newborn, and she said, "Laura, I have read Behind Closed Doors 3 times." She said, "I see myself in versions of my story in so many of those women's stories that you shared. I want to thank you." And that's the power of sharing a story.
Yes. Yes, it is. Wow. Beautiful. Wow. Okay. So you have had a long and powerful road. What do you feel was your main governing factor, Laura, throughout all of this? I'm sure that you have come across moments where you have felt like, who am I to do this? Or
Mm.
where do I land here? Am I on the right path? What keeps driving you forward?
Oh, that's such a good question. I was just having that conversation too with a friend of mine about that imposter syndrome and just feeling like, do I deserve to be in this space? How did I get here? Am I really, who am I doing this for? Like, what is this all for? And I truly believe in my heart of hearts. What I do, the path that I've taken, the roads I've gone down have all been because I know that my kids are watching. I know that they are drawing inspiration, encouraging. There's going to be times in their lives where they're going to go through some hard things. And if they can say, "Hey, my mom did this," or, my mom, quit her teaching job that she loved because it was affecting her mental health. And she just walked away from a salary and pretty good benefits, and she started over, because there will be times in their lives that they will have to start over, or they will have a frying pan moment that just hits them over the head. And I want them to be able to say, like, "Oh, this almost makes me emotional thinking about this," that, I can do it because my mom did it. And I think
That's
also, not just them, but every other, little girl or woman that I get the pleasure of holding space for, spending time with, if they can say, "Oh my gosh, if you did it, so can I." Um, and I also think that for me, this journey has been one of self-discovery. I'm not the same person that I was 10 years ago. I'm not the same person I was a year ago. We're always changing and evolving. And I think a lot of what I've done was for myself as well, to bring myself back to like that true path of integrity, and in my heart of hearts of like, what do I want to do with this time here, this precious time here that I've been given on earth, you know?
mm. Well, and another thing too is I agree that we all change, but you have made a specific choice and action.
Mm,
You ask yourself the question, why, what am I going to do with this beautiful life? Right.
mm-hmm.
But not everybody does. And so, props to you to have gone through all of these moments and to continually choose over and over again to show up for your children the way that you do, show up for yourself the way that you do, and have that bravery to move forward. Because I think that we all have it in us, but many of us, I think it's because of the belief that we don't have in ourselves generally, that
Mm,
holds us back. But many of us don't make that choice,
yeah.
and you have. And that's a really powerful thing to hold back on.
Well, and to your point, I think about the words of one of the women who shared her story in my book. A good friend of mine, her name is Shannon. She went through also a journey of a breast cancer diagnosis, and came out the other side back into the light. And she writes about how, she could be a victim or she could be a victor. you know.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like that was that mindset, that choice. And there was definitely a time in my life right following the separation and the early months of navigating divorce, because that's a whole nother podcast topic. Gosh, could share that for hours of all the layers. But there was a time where I did live in victimhood, and I say this to many of my clients: listen, do you really want to feel better? Because we actually get a lot from victimhood. We get a lot of attention.
Yes, we
There's
do.
like, you can see me now, our pain is visible. And so it's like that conscious decision of like, what energy do I want to live in? So
That's right.
yeah, you're so right with everything. There's that conscious decision of and of course I come from a life of privilege. So it was, my road was already a lot easier than others. And I recognize that. And I think that I use that privilege to do more good work. Right.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
certainly. Yeah. I have another question for you. I'm curious if you could go the person you are at this very moment right now, and you could shoot back to the frying pan moments. Um, what would you tell yourself, that person who is initially, kind of dumbfounded by what's happening, not feeling herself? What type of advice would you give that person in that place?
It's going to be hard before it gets better. But it does
Mm,
get better. It does get better. And it's hard to see in that moment. And I remember those early days. I'd have some of my best supporters say, gosh, Laura, this is going to be okay. And I was like, go say that to somebody else. I wasn't in the right headspace. But I think I'd say, like, hold on, just hold on for one more day. Somebody asked me the other day what my definition of hope was. And I said, I think hope is the belief that tomorrow's going to be just a little bit better than today. And I think that's what I would tell myself. Yeah.
yeah. And for someone listening who's in the middle of their frying pan moment, that's going to be a really, really powerful statement for them to hear. Is, it's going to get a little worse, but it's going to get better.
Yeah, I have a lot of conversations with women. Of course, in my practice, as practitioners, we always tend to attract certain themes. And for me, it's a lot of people who've been divorced or through separations or illness.
Mm,
Come into my practice, and I say, like, I know it feels dark right now, and there's nothing that I'm going to say that's going to, like, bring the light right now. But I promise you, the light is coming if you believe that you deserve it, and you believe that you're worthy
mm,
of it. We have to have that belief that we deserve that better path, that we deserve that light, because we create it. And there was a time in my life where I was thinking very negatively. And listen, like, what we think about, we bring about. It sounds so cliche, but that's how the subconscious works.
mhm. Yeah,
So being able to just always find the light, just even a little bit of light in your day, will get you through to the next day.
love that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, a few final questions here for you. I am curious. I love asking this question, especially of people who have turned their pain to power. Do you believe in the statement "time heals"?
Oh, oh my gosh, yes and no.
Mm,
I
okay.
I think that I'm going to use the analogy of like a scar. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the wound heals, but you can still see that it was there. And I believe that with time, when we can unpack all the layers of that pain and that wound, we have the capacity to tend to that wound in a different way. We have the capacity to tell our story without the attachment to, really deep emotion. I mean, I can tell parts of my story now that, without crying, without having that visceral body reaction, that nervous system response, than I would have been able to 10 years ago. So I do believe time gives us the space to be able to have a bird's eye view on that pain, and look at it as, a collection of time or history or stories that made us who we are today,
Mhm.
if that
Isn't
makes
that the truth?
sense.
It does. Yet
Mhm.
what I'm hearing is, it's twofold. It's the time itself that gives us the bird's eye view, and the choices that you make while it's healing. And that, so
Absolutely.
it's not just time heals, it's time and choices, is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
Yeah, because if you continually pick at that wound, it's not going to heal. If you continually pour salt on it by keeping in that victimhood mindset or staying rooted in resentment and anger and the depths of sadness. I mean, I've been able to have conversations with people who've been through the most unimaginable pain. When I say that, I mean, we could imagine it, but we don't want to go there. And they've been able to just come out of it and find the light again because of that collective choice of, listen, I can either stick in this thick, hard pain, or I'm deserving of some positivity, some light, because I sat in those dark days. So I deserve the light.
Absolutely. I love the imagery of pick at the wound or pour salt on the wound. And I would wholeheartedly agree that victim mindset is those things. Okay, so I want to come together and start to connect all the dots here, because I know that you're speaking on stages now at women's empowerment events and all of those sorts of things. What brought you? I'm following the trajectory here. So we've got books, and now we're on stage speaking at women's empowerment events. Was that a natural? Did that happen with time, or?
Yeah, I think it happened pretty naturally, as I've been for the last 10 years, just facilitating my own women's retreats and workshops and events. And as a teacher, I mean, I've just been teaching my whole life and speaking my whole life. And so being in front of an audience just comes very naturally to me. I really enjoy the energy of an audience. I really enjoy, that heart to heart space, feeling the energy of the audience, seeing the eyes, hearing the stories. I mean, I heal just as much as I think many of those in my audience. And I think sometimes it just comes naturally, people reach out and say, hey, I heard that you speak on this. Would you come speak here? And that just, that I think was one of the best things that came out of my pain, was being able to share my story to help others heal too. So whether that be through books or spoken word or podcast interviews, just always just sharing that little bit of vulnerable side so that others can have that invitation to do the same thing.
Well, you've truly found your purpose. I can see that, and in so many ways. So, I was going to ask, where can we find your books? Where can we find your speaking? Where can we find your, but there's so many things. So where can we find all the information, Laura?
Well, two spots. If you go to my website, lauralawrence.ca, you can see all the goodies there. My books are all in my shop page. And then on Instagram, I am lauralawrence.author. So head to one of those and you'll have a line to me.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay. Well, like I said, it's been an absolute honor. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Do you have any final thoughts for us? Are you feeling good? Feeling complete?
I just want to thank you for turning your pain into purpose and creating this space where you invite other women and other guests on, because every little bit of hard work we do matters. And so, you have your own story of strength and resilience, and I can't wait to sit heart to heart with you and chat about that. But thank you. I'm very honored that you asked me to be here today.
Oh, that's my pleasure. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for listening. If you found expansion with this last episode, then that means that others will too. And the best way to get the word out about the podcast is by leaving a review. I would be so grateful if you could leave me a review and let me know how you felt about the podcast. Included in the show notes will be everything that we talked about today, including all of my transformative programs. Change is just on the horizon, my friend.